Good evening to everybody. My name is Adalgisa Giorgio, and I am introducing this evening's event. I am a co-director of the Center for Contemporary Women's Writing, and I am very, very pleased to be able to introduce this project, which was proposed by Alessandra Trevisan and Serena Todesco, and which we in the Center really liked. So the topic is The Grain of a Voice, Women Writers and Literary Podcasts, Critical Functions and Cultural Impacts, which was conceived and organized by Alessandra and Serena. Alessandra and Serena will say more about the series as a whole, but I just wanted to say that it is about the literary podcast, which is in the way they have organized the series, the 4 events, and the initial proposal is a digital form of an important digital form of cultural dissemination nowadays, which is leading to significant innovation in the area of storytelling or oral storytelling, video storytelling, and also literary criticism. I will, as I said, I'll let Alessandra and Serena introduce the series and the speakers, and the rationale behind the series. What I would like to say now is that when they proposed the topic, which we thought was highly innovative and interesting, it actually chimed very beautifully with the core project of the Center for 2026. And the project we had and we will have, which now I anticipate before we actually do the official publicity, will focus on the business of women's writing and the journey of the book from the mind and pen of a woman writer to the shelf or on the shelves. And the series consists of 4 events, 2 conferences, an opening one in March and a closing one in November, but also 2 online workshops, which look at the reading communities among young people, older people, and how the new media are changing the scenario of writing. So this is what I want to say, and now I move on to introduce our the organizers of the series, Serena. So I should start with Alessandra, do in alphabetical order. Alessandra holds a PhD in Italian Studies from Ca' Foscari, University of Venice. Her research focuses on 20th century women writers from a critical, archival, and philological perspective. She's published a monograph on Milena Milani, Un invito alla lettura, in 2024, and a very important study on Goliarda Sapienza, which looks in particular at her unpublished work. With a beautiful bit of Italian title at the beginning, the main title, Nel mio baule mentale, so which is on unpublished work by Goliarda Sapienza. So this is a brief introduction to Alessandra. Alessandra has done a lot more things, but we don't want to take any more space or time from the event. And Serena Todesco holds a Master in Comparative Literature and Cultural Studies from the University of Limerick, and a PhD in Italian Literature from Cork. Serena is a literary translator. She translates from English and Croatian into Italian, but also sometimes into English, and is a scholar of literature and gender studies, and her most significant contributions, but I'm not saying that there are any, but they're all good, but the most significant contributions from my point of view are in the field of women's writing of Southern Italy, She published Tracce a margine, scrittura a firma femminile nella narrazione storica siciliana contemporanea, of 2017, and a beautiful conversation with Maria Rosa Cutrufelli entitled Campo a Due, Dialogo con Maria Rosa Cutrufelli, which focuses on women's writing, feminism, and gender culture in Italy. She's published on many other writers, among which Elena Ferrante, Michela Murgia, Viola Di Grado, Goliarda Sapienza, Nadia Terranova, Maria Attanasio, Giuliana Saladino, and Maria Occhipinti. So I'll stop here, but I'd like to thank Alessandra Serena, but also thank the speakers, because I understand maybe one or two of them have to leave early, and so they will not be here at the end of the event to thank them. So I'll pass on the floor to Alessandra and Serena. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Adalgisa. Can you hear me well, everyone? Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm really, really happy to be here with you all. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to our seminar series. And I would, because I would like to just give you the research questions that have encouraged us to work on this project. The Grain of Her Voice explores the ways in which literary podcasts bring an innovative perspective into the field of contemporary literary criticism dedicated to both Italian and international women writers. We will be looking throughout our seminars into different national contexts. We'll be looking into Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Hungary, and discuss how podcasts are influencing and redefining the perceptions on texts, as well as specific reading methodologies in terms of intermediality and transmediality. Both Alessandra and I have been dealing with the theme of female voice in literature several times, and we will attempt to connect different mechanisms of creation and production. We will also explore the whole process behind podcasts by highlighting significant experiences, retrievals, and scholarly analysis. This urgency comes in a time where radio and web podcasts, especially completely conceived by women, appear as more and more present in the public scene. We have conceived the program with the aim of starting a discourse that takes a wide range of perspectives and disciplines, because whether it is to look at other women's voices and how they peculiarly narrate, or it is to use one's own voice to bring back to life another woman's writing, we think that the use of podcasts becomes a means of bringing back the body into the language. And reading itself, in this sense, may be seen as a process where our inner ear listens and responds to the other woman's voice. So I will not take any more time. I would just like to thank Alessandra, my co-host and friend and colleague, who will introduce the guests to the first seminar of the series, Natascha Lusenti and our guest Alice Parrinello and Alberica Bazzoni. But let me just thank quickly the center co-directors, Professor Adalgisa Giorgio and Professor Godela Weiss Sussex, for hosting our seminar series, as well as Katie Collins, who has kindly supported us in the technical aspect and promotion of the seminars. And to thank you all who have decided to join us tonight, this evening, because I warmly welcome the idea of the project. And I will invite you also at the end. We will remind you the upcoming sessions that we will organize until the end of this year. You can find the whole program on the website of the center in the section dedicated to events. And we invite you to take part in the Q&A that will follow our session. I'll just remind you that if you want to ask questions, you can use both the tool of raising hand directly and ask yourself, or you can use the chat. So I'll now pass the floor to Alessandra. Thank you all again and welcome.
Thank you, Serena, for your introduction and for this highly fruitful collaborative work. And thank you, Alberica Bazzoni and Alice Parrinello. We will have a discussion, as Serena said, of 15 minutes at the end of their presentation. And now we introduce briefly their work. Queer Graphics, Fumetti LGBTQIA+, Italiani. Is an interviews-based podcast series on Italian LGBTQIA+ graphic novelists and their works. It aims is to promote stories related to the Italian queer community and to give a platform to queer artists. The project created by Alice Parrinello, University of Edinburgh, and realized in collaboration with Alberica Bazzoni, Università per Stranieri di Siena, was funded by Arts and Humanities Research Council, Torch, first session, and by the Torch Pair Interdisciplinary Scheme, second season. Among several topics covered in the podcast are the artist's creative journey, their relationship with Italian publishing companies, North-South racializing discourses, the depiction of non-normative bodies, the relationship between queer positions and artistic form of graphic novels, and homonormativity in Italian mainstream stories. In this presentation, Alberica and Alice will illustrate the process of creation of a podcast, both in terms of concept, funding, implementation, distribution, and a lot of more things. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Serena and Alessandra, for having us today. It's a pleasure to be here, even though virtually. We decided to first give you kind of a rundown of how we created the podcast, where the idea came from, and then focus more on the sort of practicalities. So this started in 2021 from actually me being in my first year of PhD, supervised by Alberica, where I attended a public engagement with research course. And it was meant to sort of give you the toolkits on how to disseminate your research to the general public, let's say. And the aim of that course was to design your own project at the end, and specific projects were then going to get funded at the end. Luckily, the podcast was chosen for some very small initial funding, because initially it was only, I think, £200 roughly, which was more than enough because the first season was produced in 2021. So obviously with COVID, everything had to be sort of developed online. But it kind of came also not just from the, let's say, COVID situation, but also from the socio-political context of 2021. Because the idea came from two main sources, let's say. On the one hand, what I perceive is a flourishing in the development of Italian graphic novels that started, let's say, from the 2010s onwards, and especially with the podcast focusing on queer representation. I think those two things went sort of hand in hand, especially from the mid-2010s. There's been an increase in the production of graphic novels that focus on LGBTQIA+ themes. But also 2021, if you remember, I'm assuming yes, but was the year of DDL ZAN. So a proposed bill in Italy to sort of criminalize homotransphobia, lesbophobia, biphobia, and so on and so forth. And while the bill was approved in Parliament, if I'm not mistaken, it was blocked at the Senate. And around that time when I was taking specifically this course, the images of Italian senators sort of applauding for the fact that the bill was stopped at the Senate made headlines in the UK where I was living, in other sort of international newspapers. So it really pinpointed to me the need for a sort of cultural work that would talk about what it means to be a queer person in Italy today. How can art represent the socio-political situation? And so let's say that the podcast derives from these two, on the one hand, cultural, on the other hand, socio-political contexts. And the sort of first season, like I was saying, being produced in 2021, was recorded all on Zoom. And since we had very limited means, it was sort of edited by myself on Audacity. which was, an interesting experience. But luckily, the second season, we managed to get a bit more funding to actually then record the interviews in person, and actually not just sort of record them in person, but sort of go on an Italian tour, and go where the artists were living at the time, but also ask them where they wanted to be interviewed. To say, because we asked each of the artists that we interviewed for the second season if they had a specific place that was either, let's say, a trans feminist or queer bookshop in the city where they lived, or an LGBTQIA+ center where they felt comfortable in being interviewed, or that they wanted to promote, let's say, or a place where they were used to like present their own work. And so we've sort of followed their suggestion. So we ended up going to, how is it called, Alberica? I can't remember. The queer bookshop in Bologna, Libreria Igor. Sorry, I got it. And then in Ancona, we went to the local Archigay headquarters, which when I say headquarters is actually a small room. Pesaro, yes. And then in Ancona, we actually then filmed the interview in the artist's home, which again, I sort of feel like brings up the sort of core feminist practice behind the whole podcast itself, because our idea was sort of develop it relationally with the artists. So yes, we had the idea of having semi-structured interviews. So obviously the authors were like involved every step of the way. So if they wanted, we shared the sort of preliminary questions before doing the interviews, if they felt comfortable with that. But then also they were involved in the process of choosing where the episode was filmed, but also this idea of, and to sort of quote Adriana Cavalero, creating a relationality between us as interviewing people and them as interviewees, was, the desire at the bottom of it was to create something together with the artists, following a constant care process so that they always felt comfortable with every step of the way. I don't know, Alberica, if you wanted to say something about also the defining the queer element with that.
Yes, as Alice said at the beginning, this was initially her own project, her own idea, and for the first season, the selection of authors and themes was also mainly hers. And then I helped her, I think, with some advising in the beginning, and then I participated more actively in the second season, touring queer spaces in Italy, which was really nice to do. And so I think that one more, let's say, theoretical or conceptual point, and then maybe a more practical one. This is a podcast about queer graphics. So how to define what is a queer graphic novel? Is it because it is written by a queer person? Is it because it has queer aesthetics? Is it because it has queer topics, characters? I think we took all this into consideration in the beginning and avoided a taxonomy approach of what is queer, as if we had to work through a fixed notion, which is the most unqueer thing to do. And we adopted this relational approach in asking in the interviews how these artists viewed the concept of queer, the identity of queer, both in terms of their sexual, political positioning, but also how they view queer in their work and how they view queer in their aesthetics. The interviews were structured around fixed questions that we would ask everyone. So there is some continuity where you can also compare answers by different artists, but then also delving into their work. So there was also a lot of space dedicated to their art, really, and how they conceive of their work, and the question about aesthetics, whether they find ways in which the form of their art, which of course combines words and images, is queer. And we had very different and very rich responses. And I think one artist, Nikos Balboa, who's a trans artist who works in Paris, they work a lot on form, and there are a lot of metamorphoses in the images that they portray, a lot of sirens, and the aesthetics. They don't use, for example, fixed squares, and so they work a lot on that. A very different example would be artists who try to, for example, depict bodies in a non-normative way. So try to work. They were telling us a lot about how they learned to draw in very normative ways. So when you learn to draw a body, you always have these perfect models about muscles and a certain structure. So they were queering the body. So these are just two examples to give an idea of what these interviews brought out. We always ask them what is queer to them, and then delved more into their own work, which is very, very different, actually. So I think this podcast with the 2 seasons really gives a wonderful overview. And something that struck me, as I said, it was Alice's concept in the beginning, is how many there are. We really managed to, I can't remember how many, Ali, in the end we interviewed, but
10. But
10.
I still feel guilty because there could have been many more.
Exactly. Like, there were so many that we left out. And then something maybe more practical is that we switched from audio only, sound only, to video as well for the 2nd season. And then I think that my major contribution in this case was to tell Alice to hire someone to do it properly, because she was, I think is one of the a person who can learn anything, really, but maybe this was pushing it a bit too far, doing the interview and curating the camera, the sounds, the lights. And so we had some additional funds, and we were able to hire someone from Bologna who traveled with us for different interviews, and we developed a very interesting and nice relationship with her as well, who was used to work for social projects, and so was very interested in what we were doing. And maybe we worried a little bit they would create more distance with the artist, because of course being filmed is heightened exposure. But in the end, I think there was a very collegial way of doing it and friendly way of doing it. Also thanks to the spaces, because going to their spaces, of course, creates a lot of comfort and easiness. So I think that these are the some of the points about the podcast, and then the outcome is a sound podcast for the 1st season, and a video one for the 2nd one, which maybe Ali, you can say a bit more about this, but of course talking about not only the voice in this case, but also image. These are intermediate works by definition, so we thought that having the possibility to show, for example, the cover of their books, or in one case with Percy Bertolini, we showed with our images of them showing their work, like different canvases, really, where they were working for the book. So also some unseen material, because it's the big painting that then becomes the book. So it was very enriching. I think it was on this occasion, really, the format gave a lot to the kind of content that we were trying to communicate.
Yeah, and just to add, I feel like especially when working with graphic novelists who are obviously used to the visual and sort of expressing themselves more in visual terms, obviously there's also the textual element, but then being able to film their work really added something to the experience itself. And especially, like Alberica was saying, being able to be there in person and sort of bridge that gap that obviously having an interview over Zoom creates, really worked very well in terms of like creating a relationship with them as well. That went beyond the, okay, we're gonna do this interview an hour on Zoom and then, that's it. But in this case, it really helped also establish a relationship with them in terms of then creating events to promote the podcast. Because then after we released the second season, if I'm correct, we actually managed to launch the event at the Libreria Igor in Bologna with a few of the artists, which was incredibly, I don't want to say moving, but especially after having interviewed some of them only on Zoom because of COVID, then being able to bring most of them all in person and to sort of then discuss the process and what it meant for them and what they could gain from this specific network. Because again, not to, how to say, toot my own horn, but I feel like the podcast itself really helped the artists themselves getting to know each other, because there's a strong group of them that really, they all work in Bologna and they're obviously more familiar with one another, but others were more on the fringes, let's say, of the mainstream graphic novels scene in Italy. Because here, and I think it was one of the interesting aspects that really came out of the interviews, is that some of them sort of worked with Bow Publishing or the sort of more well-known graphic novels companies, but others tend to self-publish a lot, or they tend to rely on digital media such as Patreon to promote their own work. And being able to bring them all together and talk about what it means to be a graphic novelist today, what are the limitations, or like how can they express themselves, was very useful. And bringing them all back in person to sort of bring it back again to the body and see this network actually sort of interact and see the artists interact with one another. I think, again, I could be mistaken, but I feel like two of them really expressed their gratitude about being able to finally being brought together in person with other artists and being able to talk about, some of the limitations of their work, but also some of, potential possibilities of working together, which really came from being able to be there in person and not just in a podcast. And I feel like one of the things that was really on our minds when developing it, which is also obviously asking the artist to define what queerness means to them, has a theoretical framework, obviously following sort of Judith Butler and the idea that there's not a specific definition of queerness, but it also had a more kind of educational purpose, which was more of trying to work with terms that could be familiar, not just to the two of us, but Alberica and I, but also to the artists, but also to the general public. Because the idea at the core of the project was to go beyond academia, and in order obviously to be accessible, the idea was to establish the terms, define the terms, so that we were all sort of aware of what we were working with, which then also came in handy when presenting the work in Bologna, or then we did another online presentation. I think it came, useful as both, methodologically and practically, to sort of all be familiar with the same keywords and like terms that we were discussing.
I take it from here, saying that really the question of self-definition, so being able to give a voice to subjects who are rarely given a voice other than their arts, but their art is very marginalized, is very at the fringes, as Alice was saying. So this is a podcast about marginality, really, and marginal voices. And it was moving, this meeting that we had, this launch that we had in Bologna. It turned it turned into a bit of a round table in which people were giving vent to their frustration at publishing houses. And so a very feminist practice of sharing difficulties in working with mainstream, with hegemonic discourses, really, both in terms of content and aesthetics, because they're also, some of them are very, not all of them, but some of them are also very experimental artists. And so there is this sense of speaking from the margin, of isolation, of being alone, or always being the object of representation and not the subject of representation. So being able to not just give them a voice in the sense, but also give them a space, or not give them, I don't like that, but setting up a space where we could all interact together was really helpful, I think, and something that bridges the podcast as, let's say, sharing culture, or we are used to publications that are conceived top down. I write something and somebody else reads it. This was very collaborative in a sense, and the subject who participated answering questions were very much active in making it into something impactful beyond. And I also think that in terms of what Alice was saying, defining terms, trying to be as accessible as possible, it was really the best use we could make, I think, of our academic background and our access to academic funding, because funding a project on queer artists in Italy, touring spaces. The one in Pesaro was this tiny room with, by, I think it was Archigay, that was shared with a lot of other, like, it was a very, imagining that we were being there funded by Oxford University, and then the podcast would end up on the website of Oxford University with English subtitles as well. So adding, maybe you can also say a bit more about this, Ali, also considering how much trouble you had getting these subtitles right. But it really bridged, it created a lot of bridges. So among them and between academia and the art world, and especially this experimental art world, and also between Italy and England, because most of the artists were not really known to an English-speaking audience. So, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe add up like a final point, because then I feel like we've been talking a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how much
with
time
the timings,
to
because I was looking at the time. And to sort of maybe a final point on the language. Obviously, it being a podcast on Italian artists, and given the Italian political context in which it was developed, the idea was to sort of conduct the interviews in Italian. But then obviously raise some questions, as per our funding body was, an English-speaking audience. But at the same time, the artists really expressed the desire to speak and be interviewed in Italian, because otherwise they would feel a bit stifled and a bit limited in their own self-expression, obviously. So the idea was to have a podcast that could be accessible, even though obviously, especially the audio form, was going to be only in Italian. But we created a sort of transcript, both in Italian that then was translated in English. And then for the second season, obviously having a video of the interviews really made things easier in terms of creating the subtitles in English, so that we could reach a bigger audience. And then, especially because the videos were put up on the University of Oxford Torch page, Torch being the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. So obviously the platform needed an English access, like it needed to be accessible to an English-speaking audience. And it's sort of, to sort of, again, sorry, I feel like we could keep going, but I was like, maybe we should stop and hear your thoughts.
No, I think, if I may, I think it was fascinating to listen to both of you, because you gave it was such a breathing presentation. It was like I was seeing you working actually while you were talking. So it was really nice and insightful what you've been doing. I would like to quickly ask if anyone from the audience has a question. Otherwise, I already have a question for both of you. If anyone wants, we're here. Okay, but feel free to jump in if you're too shy. Just throw in some comments in the chat. I just wanted to ask you because, and you confirmed when you mentioned the DDL Zan and the coincidence actually of 2021 and the beginning of the first season of your podcast. What do you think actually is the cultural impact of these graphic novels on the Italian audience? Because I know a bit about graphic novels and comics in general in Italy, and what is the scene about, but I wonder what kind of circulation they can enjoy, what kind of impact actually they get in terms of audience feedback, in terms of creating a community which could reflect also the community that you were able to create in your own project.
Should I, Alberica? Okay, it's okay. I was checking. Well, to me, and this is sort of what really came from the podcast, is that it really depends on the platform that the artists themselves are given. So obviously, there are some authors, such as, like I mentioned, the ones working with Bao Publishing, that can reach a wider audience. Or, for instance, I feel like the person who's the sort of biggest name when we think about queer Italian comics, which is Fumetti Brutti, can actually have a bigger impact. And this is one of the many issues that we're sort of discussing, is that other artists that then tend to rely on self-publishing, you sort of already need to be in the know of at least underground comics in the Italian scene. But artists such as Fumetti Brutti or the Bao Publishing authors that we interviewed, Flavia Biondi and Giulio Macaione, certainly can reach a bigger audience. And this is kind of the goal that they themselves described for their work, because both of them have a very similar understanding of their work, which is presenting everyday stories that can be understood, and I'm quoting, by their sort of grandmothers and uncles, that can sort of have a positive impact in the understanding of and the acceptance of the LGBTQIA+ community in Italy. And this comes with obviously covering, again, everyday stories, while other artists have a more political understanding of their own work. But especially those that can have access to this bigger platform, I think can have a sort of impact, but because they already have access to that bigger platform. And especially I feel like working with a medium that is visual can really help reaching a broader audience. And I'm thinking, especially, if I'm not mistaken, Fumetti Brutti does vignettes for Domani, potentially, or like a mainstream Italian newspaper, and obviously the impact that she can have can actually have some impact. But overall, what they can do is that they construct their own network, being at a more mainstream level, being at the margins, and in any case, I feel like they can do something, even in changing the representation. And like Alberica was saying, especially, I think it was either Flavia or Giulio who were talking really about working with body shapes and being more inclusive in that regards as well. Alberica, I don't know if that, that makes sense.
I would just add the diversity of the works we have dealt with. I think that it works like this anytime we are categorizing or grouping something, creating something around something like queer, or it could be women writing, like you're putting together things that are very, very different. And this is also what happens with us, with more mainstream. We're talking about still like a small market. We're talking about a small, a marginal genre in general, that of comic graphic novels. but still there are huge differences. And also I think that this is reflected in what impact would mean in terms for these artists. As Alice was saying, some of these artists who work with major publishers have more accessible representations, and maybe for them the impact is more of making queer lives, gay lives known and more accepted in the Italian society. While for other artists who are far more radical, I would say, maybe they don't have the same interest, or they have given up on this ambition, being realistic about their encounter with society, and maybe their impact is that of challenging also these mainstream artists, of creating something that pushes the boundaries, and also maybe that gives representation to underrepresented experiences. So speaking to very, we had a lot of trans artists, for example, and then you could see that was really a way of expressing their position, and hopefully like launching a bottle in the water, hoping that a message in the bottle, that somebody would find it somehow. So creating maybe smaller communities, and not that of the grandmothers and aunts and uncles, but pushing a bit the boundaries also in terms of aesthetics. So there's a lot of experimentalism. And I think of an artist like Darigatti, who is her work is cultural, is high culture. Like they talk about, is a graphic novel about creating an imaginary story that connects different writers through history, people who were important to them when they were growing up as a queer person. And so they created this imaginary archive, shared lives between these artists, imagining how their shared life would be. And they were talking a lot about creating an artistic archive for marginal groups. So this would be another way of being impactful on a smaller scale, maybe.
Okay, thank you, Alice and Alberica. Can we say that you have an Instagram profile? And
Yes, the podcast has an
also we can find the podcast on Spotify. So if you...
I just wanted to ask ask Alice a question before, because I know she has to leave and I don't know the answer.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how many people listen to the podcast or watch the videos? What was
In total, well, for the podcast, I just checked, it was 7,000 for the audio, and then I guess a bit more for the videos, but I haven't done the math, which is still more than we thought was going to happen. Yeah.
More than the number of people who usually would read our articles, for sure. So it's pretty good.
Thank you again. We now move on to our third guest. Natascha Lusenti is a journalist, radio host, and television writer. Her podcast Mamma Mia originated from a broadcast story on Radio Rai 2, exploring how women unconsciously become like their mothers despite lifelong resistance. Hundreds of women shared their experiences, revealing the daughter-mother relationship as a crucial feminist territory. And the podcast waves testimonies with an interview identifying forgiveness as central to perceiving one's mother as a woman rather than merely a parent, and dialogues with works by Annie Ernaux, Natasha Woody, and Dubravka Ugresic. This methodology reflects Lusenti's feminist practice of creating dialogues across women's texts where different generations collectively examine identity and inheritance. The daughter's perspective shifts to woman understanding, encompassing the struggles and historical contexts shaping mothers' lives. Natascha, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you for asking me to be here with you. I'm very happy, really, and also very grateful. I will tell you a bit, about how the podcast was originated. First of all, I've been radio host on the second channel of the public Italian radio for 13 years now. I'm a voice of the morning shows. I've been for the first 2 years a voice of the daily morning show, so that is Monday through Friday. Then they gave me the weekend space. So we're talking about 6 to 7:30 p.m. a.m. Sorry, and so this was really after 13 years of television and 6 years of writing mainly for newspapers or weekly magazines. This was a completely new experience for me as a journalist and as a person, and it's far more the best, my favorite, because through the radio I was able to build a relationship with the people that listen to us that is not possible for example, when you work on TV. So I found a space, especially with the women, but not only with the women that listen to us. I found almost like a friendship space. I'm kind of a solitary person. I don't have a lot of friends. And sometimes I have been also very, very lonely, especially because to do this job, I moved from Rome to Milan. I'm a Swiss originally, but Rome was the city that I loved most. So this radio job was really like a very important place for me. And I was able, to my complete surprise, to build this relationship of trust, respect. So I started to talk about my experience when I thought it was politically important. One thing that I never did in television, for example, not even when I worked on social reportage or things like that, because I didn't feel like. So I have this small, it's a 2-minute space in which is a sort of the cover of the program, of the show, in which I tell a small story. It's the only written part of the show. I read it. It's like 10 or 15 lines. And sometimes I put in personal stuff. And also heavy personal stuff, like violent love relationship. When there is another feminicide, or when I need to talk about this, because I found out that through the years, I'm 53 years old, and I found out through the years that people see me and look at me in a way that I don't see myself. I was kind of a, how do you say síndrome dell'impostore in English?
Imposter syndrome.
Exactly. So I've been one woman with this. And so I really needed some time to accept that people look at me like this pretty successful journalist who works for the national radio and TV. And so I started thinking, if I say that I was in this relationship, that I didn't realize that I was in this relationship, that this guy punched me in the face, and that I didn't go to the police. Instead, I stayed with him one more year. I want to do this because maybe I can help other women not to feel ashamed of it, because I have this, like kind of respect because of the job I do. So the more and more I did this, the more and more women wrote to me on the social networks post, because Radio 2 posts this story that I write. It has been doing it since the very first time on the Radio 2 Facebook page. So you can go there on the post, and write and comment and whatever. So some of these posts have been really commented and successful. I mean, with a lot of people that goes there and they click I like and whatever. And women write to me often. So 2 or 3 years ago, I don't remember. Perhaps it was 3 years ago. I wrote this thing. I was inspired by an article that I wrote on the Guardian that put together different people that they talked about how they picked up a habit or a hobby that used to be of their dead parents or grandparents, and how this kept the grandparents or parents alive. So I thought about a colleague of mine, which told me, he had told me 2 months earlier about his mother. He had lost his mother, and to keep her alive, he was cooking he's from southern Italy, and he was cooking all her best dishes, the dishes that she was great at. And I thought about myself. I always have had a very tough relationship with my mother. I would say abusive. I grew up in a very difficult family, and I have been in therapy for like 25 years, and one of the major topics has been for ages my relationship with my mother. And my relationship with my mother entered in my therapy also in a different way. The more and more I became more aware of things, and I started to think as a feminist. So I was more and more interested in thinking about this relationship, not from a daughter point of view, but rather from a feminist woman point of view. So looking at my mother, which I've always done, but the more and more with compassion and trying to understand her. And so it was ironic for me in the last years to realize sometimes, for example, I stopped, and now I'm a vegan. I've been a vegan for like a couple of years, but I had some steps. So I stopped eating meat, and my mother stopped like 10 years ago. I love to eat salad, and my mom loves to eat salad, and I'm sure I took that habit from her, talking about food. And so I wrote this small story, 12 lines, in saying, I read this article, and I concentrated on people that talked about their mothers, that they had lost their mother and how they tried to keep them alive, even unconsciously. So I do this thing, and I realized that my mother used to do this thing, and that I'm older. And that day, and for 4 or 5 days, the women kept writing and commenting on the post. Like I had 17 likes, I think, which is a lot for Radio 2, and more than 300 comments, which were small stories. Like, this story was really moving, Natasha, you made me cry, you made me think about my mother. We have an audience which is like, most of it is like 45 years older. So we have also like 6 years old women. So a lot of women had lost their moms. And they told me, I took her plants from the terrace, and I have them right now with me, and I try to keep them alive, and in nurturing the plants and in looking at them growing old. I understand my mom. I forgave my mom. A lot of forgiveness, a lot of thinking about what I didn't like, what I didn't understand about my mom. I said I would never be like my mom, and I'm turning out not like my mom, of course, but I'm turning out a bit like my mom. And so this was exactly the kind of thought I was doing with myself and with my therapist about my mom. And so I thought, I have a lot of very, very moving and good material here. I could put it together. So I asked the broadcaster if I could do it, if I could do a podcast with it. Since there are public comments, since you've written on a Facebook post, I felt free to take that material, not grabbing, but I felt free to consider it like a sort of answer to an ideal interview that I was making with that story. So they were very excited. In particular, one girl, the director, which was a woman at the time, she didn't want to give me the small money that they gave me. She didn't want to invest in it. But the girl that was working with her, she said it's a very good idea, and so I started writing it. It's a podcast in 4 episodes of around 15 minutes each. And I wrote it like in 2 days, I think, 3 days. It came out of me like it was really something that I had inside of me, that had been there. And probably all the fondness, the respect, the trust of these women gave me the courage to talk about something which was really urgent for me, but I never thought it could be only a personal thing. It could be interesting if it was interesting for other women. So I thought maybe this is really interesting for other women. I'm really deeply convinced that the relationship daughter-mother is really important in a feminist perspective. I think I said to myself years ago, I will not think you're a good feminist or a feminist that tried it all if you don't try to fix the relationship with your mother, if you don't try to forgive what you can forgive, forget what you can forget. So, and also in that time, I found this work in some books, but I'm also right now finding things in some other books. Like, for example, now I'm reading Anne of England. I don't know if this is the title in English. In Italian is Anne of England, Anne d'Inghilterra by Julia Deck. I also read Motherhood by Sheila Heti, and it's about her the idea of having a baby, yes or no. It's a deep and very interesting book about that. But I think that some of the most interesting pages in Sheila Heti's book are about her personal relationship with her mother. So what I did was take all these hundreds and hundreds of messages, my personal experience, these books I read in that period, which was, for example, A Woman's Story by Annie Ernaux, or She Came from Mariupol by Natascha Lusenti, which were interesting books for me because they talked about difficult relationship with their mothers. So I wove everything together in a feminist way, I think, because there is no voice more important than the other, and because I really like to create fictitious, ideal, even visionary dialogues between women that never met, like, which is it's for me, it's like a dream come true, because I can meet with like these hundreds of women, and we're talking about this very intimate subject, this very intimate relationship, which everyone has, because we can be mothers or not, but we all are daughters, so we all have a mother. And so I created an ideal and fictitious dialogue with my writing, and this, I think, is also literature because it's fictitious. I mean, I reflected about this. I thought about this in the last days, because I was like, it's not strictly a literary podcast, this one. It brings together, it woves together common women voices and women writers' voices and my personal experiences. But it's really built like a novel in the way that it imagines a dialogue that in the reality never existed. And also because it's a podcast, I decided, well, for the women that wrote to me, it was not possible because it was written. So But in one of the episodes, the second episode, I interview a friend, which is a therapist, and she gave me the keyword forgiveness. And she helped me to understand that, yes, the very more painful kilometer that I did on this path was to forgive my mother for what is possible. And this really gives you the freedom to, for one thing, separate yourself from your mother, and for the other thing, see her as a woman, again, in a feminist perspective, as far as I'm concerned. But I decided not to put her voice in the podcast because she's not a professional as far as the use of the voice is concerned. So I wanted to build an artwork, literary space, there was a narrative space that was able to, because the voice can do that. I mean, if you go to theater, you know that, but also if you listen to your friends when they're particularly close to you, or to a person that has a particularly intense or interesting voice, the voice is an instrument. So you can, well, singers know that very well. So I thought I could be more useful to what she says in using my voice. I asked her if she agreed, because of course this also puts some problems on the ground. It could be like you're stealing something. Her husband didn't want. Her husband voted against it. He's a friend of mine. I mean, I used to work with him. I tried to explain to her, and she said, I understand, I agree, I don't care. I mean, you do the voice job, it's okay. And so it's a one voice podcast. So this voice gives voice to all these other voices that have written or talked to me. And I wanted to have a podcast with as less music as possible. The sound designer was chosen by the broadcaster, so I didn't do that part. I registered the reading part, so my entire narrative work. And then we put it on the platform, which is the national Italian TV platform for all podcasts. So the podcasts that are not related with radio or the radio shows, which was not good because it's a mess. It's a mess platform. So it's not easy to find things. I mean, either you know there is that thing, either you will never find it. The girl that supported my job, she tried to put it like on Spotify and whatever, but it's something that you cannot do with Rai. So that was it. So it's on this Rai Play Sound, it's called. A lot of women that listen to the radio show, they listen to the podcast. A lot of women wrote to me, and it was very moving. Again, they told me other stories. In fact, I proposed a second season because I had other stories, and in the meantime, I had read other books, with which I could have go on with the work, but it was not accepted. Still, it was very important, and also in this way, it was very generative and fertile, because I was asked last year to write a book about the relationship between women and money. And thinking about the podcast, I decided to work in the same way, and I did. So I interviewed like more than 60 women, and I put the interviews down, and I also put down pieces of my experience that had a sense in that book, and also a lot of books from feminist authors, and novelist women. And so I created the same imaginative and fictitious dialogue. And so it was also very important for my confidence in this type of writing. Did I talk too much?
No, I think you were perfect. You're perfectly on time. So
This is the radio. This
No.
no, really. I never looked at the watch, but okay, I'm fine.
If I may just say something before leaving the floor to Alessandra and to whomever wants to ask questions. I have listened to your podcast maybe 5 times because every time the use of the voice that you adopted is particularly suitable to weave together all the different voices. It's like you let them breathe through your voice, if that makes any sense visually. And I found it very inspiring, the way that you actually gave what came out actually from Alice's and Alberica's presentation, that there is a sense of community behind the entire idea of how the voice comes into the body and how the body gives back the voice to the wider space of the radio. Because here we're talking about Radio Rai, so it's something that usually is perceived as very structured, as very, something that is under some sort of institutional framework. While I think that Radio Rai contains so many seeds of creativity that are completely unspotted all the time because of the way the website is constructed, and you're absolutely right. So I really, really enjoyed it. And my only question for you, and then I promise I'll shut up, is were there any men commenting on the Facebook original posts? Or was it just women intervening?
No, there were very few men. Like I remember, for example, like 300 women and perhaps 10 men. So I didn't feel like this is also the reason why I proposed to the broadcaster. I didn't propose a feminist podcast because no, but I proposed a female only podcast, and they were like try to keep it wider, try to keep men inside too. I said yes, but then I didn't really do it, but not because I was not interested, but because I think it's another kind of work. Another kind of thinking, and also I had so many women compared to the few men. They wrote interesting and moving things. That's not the point, but they were really very few. So I said yes, but if you want me to write with these messages, they are almost completely from women, so I need to stay on that path, and eventually it was okay. We never used the word feminism or feminist, but it was okay.
It was an exercise of autocoscienza. The way I listened to it, it was a completely consciousness-raising project. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Alessandra. If you want to ask something.
Yeah, thank you. I really love your work, and also the other one, L'arte di contare. So you're great on your work. Can I ask you? You mentioned weaving together your voice with the voices of hundreds of women. Plus excerpts from women writers, and Ernaux and others. How did you navigate the transitions between these different voices and registers in the podcast, between your personal narrative, other women's confessions, literary text, and therapists' insights? How did you work?
This is, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer to you in the sense that I do it with writing. With writing on something that I gave really years of thought. So it's like I really thought about this a lot, and so perhaps I take a something out of a book, and then I put down a small story reflection about myself, or I say, these words make me think about your words. I don't care. I mean, if I think that it's like the play, the play, or the domino, it's called in Italian. It's I love to write this. I found out writing this podcast, and I think this is going to be my writing. I mean, I will write like this because it gives me a freedom and the chance to put together things that at first you will think they cannot go together. So you put like, you have 6 and 2, and then you have 2 and 5. So you went from 6 to 5 with the 2, So I do the same thing with writing, with empathy, which is something I'm good at. So I really feel the story of the person. I really feel what she's trying to tell me. And also, this is important to be said again. This was possible only after, at the time, more than 10 years of radio hosting. So 10 years in which you build together, because it's a relationship that is made of, like trust, because people that listen, the people that listen to my show on the radio, they really love me. They tell me that about all the time. And, when you do morning shows, people tend to admire you because you wake up at 4 a.m. So they're like, you're always there on Easter time, on Christmas time, and Christmas Eve, on New Year's Eve, 1st of January, which is true. I'm always there. And so they admire you, so they're like friends. They see you as a friend because your voice is in their house. I used to consider friends some radio hosts that I used to listen to. So this was possible only because of this, and so they gave me pieces of their pain, also, or the pieces of their relationships. When someone writes you on Facebook that they understand only today, 5 years after the death of their mother, that the mother made the best she could to put some food on the table, even though it's a very intimate thing. So I put it together with Annie Ernaux. I don't care. I mean, she won the Nobel, but I don't care because because these women with these books, they do exactly this. They give you something very intimate, and so I think I don't know. I would love to let them know, but I don't know. But I think they wouldn't mind if they knew.
Okay. And how do you consciously craft these vocal choices you did in the podcast? I mean, the poses, the tones, the pacing, to create the intimate space you're seeking. Or I'm asking if you begin with writing and then you think about your voice when you read, when you record.
Well, for sure, I did a lot of exercise in writing this story for the radio. So through the years, I remember when I started writing this text, it was different from what it became through the years. Also, the content was different. I started with political issues, which really now, then I made it more like a reverie, like more intimate. Sometimes I like give a picture of something that I saw the day before, and then there is this I have like different moods, like different stories, different big titles in which I put stories. It depends from what goes on also in the world or in myself. And so I think I have this rhythm now in me. So I kind of know how to write for the oral storytelling. Yeah. And I find it it's very, I have fun in doing that. It's really something I would love to do more, because it's really nice to use your voice. A couple of times I did this on other people's podcasts, reading other people's stuff, and it was interesting. It's fun. It's a kind of work with a voice that I really enjoy.
Thank you.
But I follow my taste. I completely follow my taste. I never need lessons.
You're in the process.
Yeah. It's true. It's like a kind of come si dice quando sei in in the process, when you're like in trance, like a little bit like this. So yeah, you know it's right, but you don't know how to explain it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Professor Sussex.
Hi. Hi, thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. At one point you said it works like a novel, like an imagined dialogue, and you also described it as narrated space, which I thought is a wonderful concept. So I was wondering, would it also work as a novel?
I'm wondering about it too, because I thought several times to transform it in a book, and I don't know how to work on it. I don't know. Should I follow the essay route? Should I follow more a novel thing? Should I interview more women? Should I make up more women and daughter and mother stories? I think it could. Yes, I'm still trying to figure it out, the way to do it. But I think it could. Yeah. And the more and more I find books that talk about this, I really think now I have no idea. You are the expertise, so I have no idea statistically how many times women writers have talked about their women in novels or essays. I think I should perhaps study a bit this thing, but for sure, in the last years they are doing it more and more, and because I don't specifically look for those books, but I keep finding them. So I'm thinking perhaps this is, and I think this is very interesting. This says something about the job that women are doing on themselves. I think it's really, really very important and painful sometimes.
I'm just thinking it could be a really innovative way of advancing novel writing as a communal project. I think
you're right. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Adalgisa, you had a question.
Thank you, Natascha, for a wonderful intervention that I could probably talk for an hour, just going through the thoughts that went through my head. But a lot of those thoughts would also have to do with what you were saying about relationships between mothers and daughters, rather than what we are discussing today. More about the contents of what people would have said, what you said, which is not what we are here for. But there would be, I will go and look up Facebook and try and see what people say. But what was, I found it very, very interesting, but also emotional from my point of view, is because I've been writing about mothers and daughters in literature for a long time. I'm finding it quite difficult because you're talking about forgiveness and all that. And I, at the age of 28, when I understood that I had a very important something in me about my mother, which actually then I discovered that went back to when I was probably even 5 years old. But I don't want to go into personal stuff now because I don't want to bore anybody. But that the important thing for, what I have gained, understood from books is the lack of voice, in the sense of not being able to make, to turn into words what you could, what you felt, but also not to be able to talk to your mother. So what I see that is really bowling me over on this is the fact that you are creating a voice where people vocalize, are able to bring out what they would probably like to tell their mothers, or what they have not been able to understand about them, about themselves, and how they related to them. And creating a new culture in trying to understand the mother, which has been what I've been saying for many years. And so I'm not too happy with the word forgiveness, because it does imply a culpability, which I understood from when I was 5, that I had to understand my mother, that I had to be on her side, and that I had to not to abandon her ever, in many symbolic or even concrete ways. But what Gordela was saying just now, her question was about, can you create a novel out of it? And that would be amazing if we could create a choral novel of all these voices. Because in literature, at least, there is a lack of voice, there's a lack of interaction. And then when often lots of the novels that I can remember that I have read, there is an attempt to talk to the mother, even in linguistic terms, creating creating an interaction through writing. Creating, even apostrophizing the mother, but really creating a relationship based on talking. But not always, that cannot always happen, cannot happen, because the mother is often dead. So it is still the daughter that tries to talk to the mother, and the mother that talks as imagined by the daughter. So what you could achieve with this, or you probably have achieved, is to create a real conversation with voice. And yeah, I'll stop here because it's there is a lot there to say, but thank you very much. This is, the work you've done. It's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a question from Professor Ursula. Is that you, Professor Fanning? Hi. I can't read your name.
Fanning.
Yes, that's me. Can you hear me?
Hi, Ursula.
Hi. I'm sorry, I can't turn on my camera. It's lovely to see all of you. And thank you all so much for your input. That has been really, really interesting on so many levels. Alberica, I will have questions for you and Alessandra, but I'll be in touch with you about those separately. I wanted to ask Natascha a question because I hadn't had a chance to, I won't have a chance probably to speak with her in the immediate future. So Natascha, thank you. I have not managed to find your podcast, but I will do my very best to find it now. It sounds really interesting. I had a query that kind of relates to what Adalgisa has just said as well. I'm wondering to what extent there are, in your podcast, there are maternal voices coming out as well as daughters' voices, or all of the voices daughterly voices, per forza, by definition.
No, there is my mother's voice.
Yeah. I was coming downstairs when you were, I think possibly when you were talking about that. So you voiced your mother.
There is my mother's voice. I talked to her before writing this.
Yeah.
I asked her if she agreed. She didn't agree, but she said, do whatever you want.
Okay. And that I heard the bit about her husband not agreeing. But I was wondering about how it was for you voicing your mother. Was that very different from voicing the other voices, if you like, that you were dealing with? Was it more emotional, harder? I'm assuming it was.
It was hard. I cried also. Mm-hmm. It was hard because I agree that the word forgiveness to forgive, it's a fragile word. It's a complicated word. I agree, but I really managed to do this partially with my mom, and to go over some things. She, for example, for ages, she told me, "You tend to forgive your father more than you do with me." She told me this when I was a kid, for example, when I was a young, not kid, adolescent, and I was like, "No, it's not true. It's not true. You're wrong." But actually, she was right. She was right, because I was not a feminist then, and I didn't see a lot of things that I started to see later. So, for example, writing this down and reading this was very emotional, very moving for me.
Yeah, thank you. I just was wondering about that process. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, maybe?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the moving and also, thought-provoking presentation, both presentations. And I want to ask you to Natascha, because when talking about, for example, giving your voice to your mother, I was thinking of Alina Marazzi, Un'ora sola ti vorrei. So my question is, do you, when processing all this material, all this voice, do you choose only narrative materials, or you refer also, because I haven't listened to the podcast, sorry, so I'm not sure if you also use, for example, cinematic resources or visual resources in your podcast? No. Okay.
No, I love cinema. I have a degree in cinema, but there is no cinema. There are books and words and.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with Alina Marazzi documentaries? So are, her works inspired you in a way or not?
Not directly, but I think everything that I read and watch, works within me. I have a very rich inner life. I have very few friends, but a lot of friends in me. So I confront myself constantly with particularly other women jobs and reflections, particularly on mothers. Perhaps hers was one of the very first that made me think about that. Yeah, you're right. I never thought about that, but you're right.
Yeah.
Any other questions or observations also for Alberica and Alice, of course? I would just like to say something very quick that maybe binds together both the presentations that we've listened to today, because I've been rethinking thanks to your perspectives, what was our initial intention when we first conceived the seminar series. And I already think that many interesting things are coming out, because what we will try to do, to discover, to deal with, is not just of course, the technical process and the impact and the social and the cultural impact that podcasts have, whether they're on web, on radio. But I think that there is already the idea of a very strong relational nature of podcasts. There is something, some sort of a constant exchange that leads the way to a communal use of the voice. What Godela was earlier saying, and what Adalgisa confirmed about the idea, for example, of writing a novel where many voices are encompassed and many voices kind of are not only put on the same level, so there is no hierarchy, but also that there is the idea of bringing in something that cannot just be said by one voice. It's the impossibility of getting rid also of the dialectics, if you want, of the original writer characters, or the dialectics between the writer, the narrator who dominates, and the potential reader, who is this unknown and very alien entity that is always it has to be always reinvented, constructed, imagined, thematized. So I think that I'm observing something that is very interesting, because I'm thinking of my relationship with radio podcasts. Originally, I thought of this when discussing with Alessandra. There was the idea that I have a relationship with the podcasts that I listen to. I collect podcasts that are literary based. I have several thousands of podcasts already, maybe for 15 years collecting. And I do have a relationship with those multiple voices that talk to me through time. So what both Alberica and Alice on one hand and Natascha on the other hand did, I think, gave a space that is not just a narrative space, but a temporal space also, in terms of impact that this can have short-term and then long-term, whether it's available on the web or on the radio, which is now the same thing because radio is also a web space. So I think it is very interesting, and it's very promising and kind of comforting too, to have this kind of dimension that, you know, we can always go back to and refresh our minds with. So just a thought.
Can I ask, Adalgisa, can you write me down the book or the books where I can find your work on the daughter and mother in literature?
Yes, if you want, I can get your email address from Serena, and we can have a conversation by email.
Please. Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for being interested.
Alberica?
Yes. I don't know whether we are already over time. I don't know how long it was supposed to last, but I will be brief in any case. I also wanted to thank you for this invitation, which was unusual in the format. And so also Alice and I were not exactly sure how to present it, what would be a good answer to the question, to the questions that you were asking. And I was quite struck, like listening to Natascha's presentation, which is very, very different from ours, also in terms of emotional tone, but by this element of co-creation, of relationality, of pluralism of voices as well, like something that cannot be said by one voice only, but also that doesn't necessarily put one voice against another, but makes space for plural experiences. And this is something that with our podcast also we experienced a lot, and was very beautifully created relations as well. And so, yeah, Caballero has been right all along, of course, when talking about the voice. It really seems like a format that has something to it that can be really explored in a feminist vein. And also, in terms of academia, it's a perfect tool for being dentro fuori, inside and outside of the institution, because it's a very malleable tool. It can be used to communicate, to intercept different audiences. And so I think it's a great idea to do a seminar series on podcasts from this angle, and just wanted to thank you for organizing it, for thinking about it, and for inviting us, also on behalf of Alice, of course, who had to leave, inviting us to this first episode.
Ma grazie a te. Thanks to you, Alberica, really. I don't know if Alessandra, you wanted to draw some conclusions. I think we're perfectly on time to finish our first session. I must say I'm very grateful to all of you, to all the people who participated, to our guests, and to the center, and to both co-directors who have been so nice and kind as to assist us and give us their voices and their presence. The next appointment of our seminar series will be on October 30th. We will have a session with Sorry, my computer just blocked. Okay, we will have a session with myself and Alessandra will discuss about voice. The topic will be voices of engagement, narrating social political oppression. We will be presenting the archive Una come lei, a poetry archive for the future, which is at the Biblioteca delle Donne di Bologna, and then we will have a guest from University College Dublin, Natascha Lusenti, on talking about the active presence of women and as podcast producers in contemporary Greece. So we will just move to another cultural context, but I'm sure equally interesting and fruitful. So and then the next appointments will be in November. So thanks to all of you, and Alessandra, I'll give you the last word.
No, thank you. And see you next time.